Hi, everyone. We're just going to wait a few moments. It looks like there's a few more people sort of trickling in. If you wouldn't mind trying to keep yourself on mute, and we'll try to help if needed. And Ren, maybe just let me know when you think we have everyone in.
That's impressive.
We have 47 participants and no one in the waiting room.
Okay, well, why don't we get started? It looks like we're already 2 minutes past the start time. So good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Dues and Fees webinar. It's starting to feel like it's an annual tradition for us. Some brief introductions here. I'm just gonna speak to a few people who are on the call. So we have a list here of our committee members. I believe everybody is here. I already have seen Daphne. She's from the Atlantic region, specifically from PEI. I know that Rob Patterson is here. He is the chair of the Dues and Fees Committee. Carol Purser, Derek Ventnor, I'm sure a few others. If you have questions or if you can take a peek around those little squares, the little Zoom squares, I'm sure you'll see more people. We also have a few staff here, including those who've been part of this process. So Terry Dillon, CEO, myself, and Sid Murdoch. We also have Alethea and Ren. So it's nice to see everybody. Here's a bit of an outline for how we're going to spend this evening. For those of you who have been part of this before, you'll note that it looks really similar, but we have a few bits and pieces tonight that are considered new. First off, we'll go through just at a high level how the dues and fees process is really connected to our state governance. We're going to speak to the timeline and the process that's followed by the Committee on Dues and Fees. We'll go in briefly, just some details around the membership model, but also we're going to provide you some information that we learned recently following a survey that we did, sort of like a check-in with the membership on how things were going with the membership model in its current form. We're also going to share some details around the participant and the competition activity from the 22-23 fiscal year. We'll share some details around our funding and revenue and all the investments and benefits, as well as get into some more of the finer detailed financial information, including just speaking to the summary, the 5-year summary of operations and the statement of financial position. Then we're going to hand it over to Rob, who's the chair of the Dues and Fees Committee, to speak through the process and some of the considerations that they went through that ultimately resulted in the recommendation that they're presenting to you tonight. And there's going to be plenty of time for questions and feedback at the end of the, once we wrap up with some of the slides. If you do have questions though, you don't have to wait until the end. You can certainly plunk those in the chat. I'm going to keep an eye on those. And if we see anything that's relevant to the topic that we're speaking to in that moment, I think we'll probably just try to address it then. Otherwise, just want everyone to know that there is going to be time at the end where we'll open the floor. And if you want to actually speak to your question, you are welcome to do so. If you do have questions though throughout, it's best if you use the chat function there. So just plunk it in there. And if you do even want to speak at that moment, I think we can probably arrange for that. If you have questions that come up after the fact, which we know sometimes happens, once you've had a moment to digest some of the information that you've taken in this evening, by all means, you can connect with Rob, again, the chair. So his email's up there. And if it's helpful, we can put it in the chat. Also, you can connect with Derek Ventnor, who's the treasurer. As far as future communications with this information, we are recording the webinar. We will post it online. We will also make sure that any of you who received the package this evening, we're going to post that package later to the website. And then all of this information does end up in the voting package that accompanies other details around the RCA semi-annual meeting that takes place at the end of January. So I'm just going to take a peek first at the questions if we have anything yet. Oh, people saying hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Okay, let's get started. So over to you, Derek.
You're on mute.
You'll probably hear me better if I take myself off mute. We've only all been living on Zoom for the last 3 years, so sooner or later I'll get the hang of it. My apologies. So once again, good evening, everyone. This first slide that I'm talking about is just an overview of this process. So many of you are familiar, I'm sure. Some of you won't be. That the whole annual process of reviewing our dues and fees for the association is actually embedded into our bylaws. The requirement to do that is in the bylaws, that we will have a committee that goes through a process, makes recommendations, and it is really based around a principle of getting input from the grassroots level, the local level, and fed up through right up to the national body. So there's I'll go through the detailed calendar of the process in just a moment, but at a very high level, the committee's put together. It's confirmed. The membership of the committees are confirmed at a certain point of the year. And then we go through the process, which I'll speak to in detail in just a moment. And this process considers financials. It considers the activity that Jennifer is going to speak to in a moment. And it also a very important piece of it is consultation with and through the Dues and Fees Committee. And then once we've gone through this process, and that part of the process is now almost over with this webinar, there will then be a recommendation from the committee that will go forward to the board of directors. And then that proposal or recommendation, I should say, will actually be voted on by the membership at the semi-annual meeting at the end of January. This year, it'll be in Quebec City. So that's just kind of a high-level overview of this process and where it come from and why we do it. Next slide. So for this year's process, here's some of the specific dates we've worked through. So the very first, it was basically the kickoff was mid-September, just prior to the annual meeting in September this year. The committee first met after staff prepared a significant amount of information to be considered by the committee, and basically relatively the same package of information with a bit of a twist with the membership survey this year thrown in. For the end of October is when that committee first met and had some discussions. We took some time to mull that over. The various members of the committee had time to discuss, as well as get feedback from their respective regions on some of their go-to people. And then we met again on November 14th to finalize a draft recommendation that we're presenting tonight, or discussing tonight, I should say, and kind of giving the heads up to the membership too. What will happen is after tonight, if there's any material feedback that comes out of this evening, we will meet one more time just to make sure we've got everything in our ducks in a row, and we don't want to make any amendments to our recommendation that will go forward to the board. That will be then presented to the board of directors on December 13th. That is the board's next meeting, at which time they will review and consider that recommendation. And then finally, as per direction of the bylaws, the recommendation will be communicated to the membership at least 21 days prior to the semi-annual meeting. And then we will present a plenary session on Saturday, the 27th, before the actual motion to approve that will be done in the formal meeting on the Sunday morning on January 28th. So that's just a bit of a rundown of the steps of this year's process. Next slide.
Okay, I think this is for me. This is just to get everyone oriented, or to serve as a reminder that the topic of the fees and the dues are related to these specific dues and fees, and these are the ones that are currently in place. So provincial rowing associations, their current dues are $765. Special associations and associate organizations are $545. Rowing clubs are at $440 right now. Participant fee is $26.25, and the seat fee is currently $3.85. Okay, so just as a reminder, it was earlier this summer when we did what we're characterizing like as a membership model check-in. So we weren't doing a full-on sort of review of the membership model. We just wanted to get a sense of what were some of the sentiments or the thoughts, and gather information from the local level of membership related to the model. And we asked a suite of questions, and a lot of those were specific to the participant category and also the seat fee. So I'm going to give you like a glimpse of some of the findings that we have. It's certainly not comprehensive, but we thought that these particular ones that I am going to speak to would be relevant to to this particular group that clearly has an interest in dues and fees. So first off, one of the questions was asking how suitable is a single RCA participant category for club membership needs, and respondents were offered the opportunity to rank from 0 to 5, 0 being not applicable, 1 equaling not at all suitable, and 5 being extremely suitable. And as you can see here, I'll just hover my cursor over here, 27.45% is the most, like the highest number of responses that were collected were within this ranking. I'll also mention that I think it was around 56 or 57, I think, clubs that responded to this survey, which we consider to be actually a pretty high response rate, particularly just given when it was offered, which is during a pretty busy time of our season. So we definitely appreciate all of the individuals who did take the time to complete that survey. Another way we think is useful to cut the data is to just do a combination of essentially here, like the lowest rankings, so 1 and 2, and also coupling like the highest rankings of suitability 4 and 5. And again, you can see here that 29% of the respondents selected either 1 or 2, and 47% of the respondents selected 4 and 5. So I think it's reasonable or sensible to, one of the conclusions you could draw from this is that the participant category as is, many are telling us that it is suitable, it is fitting some of the purpose that it's meant to do so. We also had some open-ended questions. And so people provided some of the positives and also some of the negatives in relation to that participant category. And so what we heard loud and clear, there was a real theme of that a lot of people thought it was like simple to administer and understand. And I did note that there were some, I think, references to our previous, now getting older model of an RCA competitive and an RCA sport fee. So that was several years ago now. But I actually do remember at that time, people were sharing that they thought it was actually confusing. How did you categorize someone who was in a competitive category versus a sport category? And so it was just reinforced in the survey that people thought that the one category was simpler to understand. It also seemed to, for many people, enable a lot of flexibility, and it could reduce expenses for those who were interested in competing. I believe there were several comments that for an individual who maybe just wanted to race once per year, that would be a good example of someone who now has a reduced level of expense when it comes to competing. And we did also, there was a theme of that they thought that just the one category seemed to align well with the type of service that was offered, that everyone or many people who are paying the fee are getting an equivalent suite of services that is applicable to them. We also heard loud and clear that there were a lot of comments that people thought that just the one category, that there were issues related to it not being applicable to short-term programming. And I might speak to that in a few slides. And that also some people thought it was expensive, and particularly when you actually combine it with a PRA fee. So I'm just going to keep an eye. Do we have any? Okay, no questions yet. So I'm going to keep going through. I know this is quick. And so if you do want at any point for us to go back and revisit some of the slides, just let us know. Happy to do that. So this is a similar way of showing the responses to an equivalent question related to the RCA seat fee. So we asked, how suitable is that single RCA seat fee overall for your club membership needs? And we saw here that the highest number of responses, again, was the highest ranking, which is considered extremely suitable. So number 5, but it's you can see here that the neutral response was also selected at a high rate. Again, just cutting the data differently. So coupling the highest and the lowest rankings, we're seeing here that 20% had either selected 1 or 2, which would be a low ranking of suitability, and that 36% of the respondents selected either 4 or 5. So almost a similar conclusion can be drawn that this seems to be working okay, or is suitable for a lot of our, at least for the respondents. And I do think we have a bit of work to understand a bit more of this like neutral, but I did take a peek, and there are some people or some organizations that would have responded that actually don't compete at all. And so that's not part of like what they or how they run the organization, or not part of programming for them. And so I think some of them fall within this category. We also asked a similar, open-ended questions of trying to understand what's working or not working, or what do you find positive or not around the seat fee. Similar sort of like themes here. People thought it was really simple to understand. And that we heard that people thought that the fee itself was actually reasonable, and many didn't actually consider it to be expensive. On the flip side, some people said that it was expensive. So you can imagine that, that it works for some and not for others. And what was interesting, and I think we've heard before, even surveying through this method, is that there are a lot of regattas, like regatta organizers or organizing groups, that do feel that just the mechanism of how like the seat fee is really coupled or associated with going to the event, it makes it seem like their regatta is more expensive. And so that was reinforced and understood from the feedback that we collected. So let me just take another peek. Okay, no questions yet, so I'll just keep going until someone stops me with a question. So we also sought some additional feedback. We heard loud and clear, people were really enthusiastic, and we appreciate when you do provide a lot of detail and emphatic thoughts around if something's working really well or not working well. It gives a bit of clarity to us. And we heard that the Come Try is working really well for many of you, and that you're appreciative of it, and that it's working well for your club, and that you're already looking forward to doing some next year. So that was really helpful to understand. We also got some interesting feedback about equity deserving groups and programs, and how we register those individuals, as well as the comments related to short-term programming. So within the equity deserving groups, so just as an example, that would be the programs that fell within the community sport for all. It was mixed feedback. We had some people who were really clear on why we need to explore a different sort of avenue of how to register particular groups, and they, what they provided made a lot of sense. The information, the insight that they provided, it made a lot of sense that we should look into this more. And some people were really open about this is new to them, and they've only done it for 1 year. And so they need a bit more learning. And so they don't know what's going to work or not work for the equity deserving groups, and that we need to do a bit of work here to understand and start trying some different things. We also heard from some respondents that what we currently have in place just isn't really suitable for that short-term programming. And what we mean by short-term programming is something that, almost falls in between, like it's beyond Come Try, but before someone maybe takes on like a full-on sort of like learn to row program. And, what we already know to be true is that the way the clubs across the country deliver their programs, it is extremely different. Some clubs do learn to rows for 6 weeks, some do them for 1 week. And so there's something really special here that we need to look at. And so that's why both of those are asterisks, because as far as next steps go, we're going to do some work first with understanding the equity deserving groups, what we can do there for registration, and explore some different options. And then at some point, I would expect kind of later 2024, we'll be able to move on to trying to understand a bit more about what does a short-term programming piece look like. So I'm not getting any questions, so I'm going to keep going. Okay, so here's the participant and competition activity. I know there's a lot of information on this slide, so I'm going to help orient everybody. First things first, I hope you can all see my cursor. I want everyone to focus here on the third column of data. This is the 2022 and 2023 actuals, which, that 22-23 fiscal year, that's what we're orienting a lot of our conversations around as part of this dues and fees webinar. What we also have here, though, are some actuals related to last year. So we can monitor or provide you the comparisons or from the year prior to 22 and 23, as well as we've got information here around 2019-2020, which is the last year that we consider to be sort of a pre-pandemic year. So now that we're oriented on that, here we've got 11,701 registered participants. And when we compare that to the previous fiscal, we have seen a 15% increase. So compared to 21 and 22, we registered an additional, 1,500 people. We also saw a substantial increase in competitive activity, both when it comes to the number of people who chose to compete and also the number of regattas that were offered. So in 22-23, we had 5,700 and some individuals who chose to compete. And that was, that was 2,400 more than the previous year. And that corresponds well with the fact that we also had significantly more regattas offered in 22 and 23. That being said, we're still shy of pre-pandemic numbers, but I consider those almost like they're marginal. They're low for sure. I hope that people feel that this is starting to look good, at least in relation to us rebounding after the pandemic. Okay, let me just take a look at the questions here.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions in the, or comments in the chat.
Okay, let's see. I appreciate that EDI groups are going to be a point of focus when it comes to fees. This is a great opportunity for growth. Totally agree with you, Anne. Thank you for that. Were the survey responses received from across the country, or were they mostly concentrated in one or two particular geographic areas? I could probably pull that up in a moment. My recollection is that it was actually well distributed. That's one of the first things that we take a peek at, and that helps us understand if we actually need to resurvey. So I don't have it in front of me, but I think I can confidently say that we had a good snapshot. It wasn't just exclusively in one or two areas. And we also did get comments from both small and large clubs. So I hope that helps. Thanks, Warren, for asking. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next one. This is actually related to the current fiscal year, so the one that we are in right now. And I think this is a good news story. I hope others perceive it as such. So just comparing the first 6 months of this year to that of last year. So April 1st to September 30th in 2022, we had 10,650 individuals registered. This current year, we've already exceeded that as our 6 months. So we were at September 30th, we were already at 11,280. So hopefully that bodes well that this will be the year that we blow through those sort of like pre-pandemic numbers that we keep referencing and we go beyond those. So I hope that's helpful or of interest to everyone. If you have any questions, I know that was fast, plunk them in the chat. Don't hesitate to nudge. Oh, we've got another one here. Cool. That overlaps with the CSAI funding, correct? I don't know what you're referencing specifically. I'm wondering, is that related to the participant numbers? I think so. Yes, perfect. Thanks, Anne. Yes, but not all. I know that for certain groups as part of the CSAI, we did find sort of like unique sort of mechanisms of registering those individuals. Some of these numbers here do include CSAI, but not all CSAI. And for those of you who are interested, I don't have a slide prepped on this right now, but all in total CSAI across the country, we had over 4,000 people take part in it last summer. So CSAI is what? CSAI is a community sport for all initiative, and specific for rowing, it's called Rowing for All. Sorry, Dave. So Dave's asking what was the participant activity for the period April 1st to September 30th, 2019. I don't have it on the slide, but I can get it. We do have it. No problem. Maybe when I stop screen sharing for a moment, I can get that for you. Thanks. Okay. Let me move on and keep the questions coming, please. Oh, Terry, it's over to you.
Sure. Thank you. And thanks, Jen, for what's a lot of information. And hopefully we can provide some of that in written form, and that will give people a bit more opportunity to digest the things that we've been talking to. I'm going to speak to a couple of charts, which I believe will be familiar to those of you that have been on this webinar the last few years. The first one that's in front of you now speaks to really where our revenue comes from. And the second chart that I'll get onto in a second talks about the investment, particularly on the national side. So the first thing I just want to reference is just the current environment in which we're operating and which sport in Canada is operating. It's not just peculiar to rowing, it's peculiar to all national sport organizations, which is we've really seen a bit of an unprecedented fragmentation, I suppose, in where funding's coming from and the amount of work and effort that goes into kind of digging around and applying for some of those different pots. And some of those pots we've been successful with, and some we haven't been successful with. But whether you're successful or not, it still takes a lot of effort to put together the application. And the other thing that comes with that is uncertainty around what funding is going to be available when, and as well as that, just the lateness of funding coming. So, for example, there's one pot of money that we know we're going to get, which is going to be at least $30,000, potentially up to $130,000. We know we're not going to get until, or even get confirmation of until February next year, which sounds crazy given you're then supposed to expend the funds to March. But I mean, that's just an example of some of what we're managing and dealing with as an organization. So the other thing that impacts this chart in front of you as well. So this is very much an infographic that reflects the money that we knew about back in sort of September, October time. We've since then had additional funds come in, and there are slightly different assumptions. But if you really want to get under the hood of the numbers, then I would point you at a chart that Derek's going to show us shortly, which is a sort of 5-year operations. And you will see some differences between revenue amounts on here and revenue amounts within that chart. So one example would be that there was a phase 2 of the Community Sport for All initiative funding. And last year we received around about $1 million of funding for that. This year we applied for $1.3 million, but in the chart that Derek's going to show you, we made some estimates, and we were a little, I don't know, optimistic, pessimistic, depends. We put in about 50% of the number that we thought that we applied for, so just under 600,000. And you'll see that over 600 that reflected in the chart. That's not reflected on here, so you'll see on here in the bottom left-hand corner it shows to be determined. Well, what I can tell you, which does throw a spanner in some of the numbers, is that we received confirmation yesterday that we are going to receive everything that we asked for from the Community Sport for All grant. So that means $1.3 million of investment, the majority of which will show up as flow through, as it did last time around. I think we had about 30 rowing clubs benefit from investment in community partnerships, essentially. So to be able to sit here now and say that, you know, these numbers that you're looking at are going to show an additional $1.3 million of investment is really quite extraordinary, and huge kudos goes to all of those clubs that lent in last time around. And I think Jen has said we had some 4,000 people pick up an oar for the first time as a result of that funding. Our ability to represent that back to Sport Canada, and quite a bit of work from Jen and her team, meant that we were able to secure that funding again this time around, and in fact add to that funding, which is quite extraordinary. So just to then orientate you around this chart. So in the top right-hand corner, even though that number is going to go up now, the total RCA income, it's probably going to be closer to 9 million, I think, by the time we've pulled all the pieces in. But that shows the total amount. And how that breaks down is in the middle of the chart, you'll see something called reference level funding. And alongside that, enhanced excellence funding, which is OTP. So the total amount of Sport Canada funding, which is under what we're going to get, is shown about 4.8 million. That splits into reference level or core funding, that then splits into some of that money goes to HP, and some of that money goes towards our national budget, which I'll talk more about in a second. And then we benefit from, because we have success on the world stage, funding that comes through Own the Podium. So what you might hear of being called OTP funding. And that's what goes into fund our national team, and so on and so on. So none of the funding that comes through dues and fees and into our national budget, none of that goes into HP. That's a kind of ring-fenced amount that's very kind of designated based on our HP program and plan. So what you then can see in front of you is the red number in the middle is the high performance operational budget, and the 2 million on the left hand side is the national sport development operation. And you can see how some of the numbers feed into that. And I'm going to repeat again. Now we know about CSI, that number is going to go up quite significantly. The one important thing I just want to point, and perhaps one of the main reasons we show this chart, is that you can see the membership dues and fees represented at the top left-hand corner. So that $500,000, that 538,000 contribution, which is really what we're talking about today when we're talking about what level do we set those fees, that is the amount that then contributes to the overall national budget that you can see represented there as the 2 million. So we feel good about a kind of 3-4 time multiple. In other words, what we ask money from membership, what we feel good about is about a 3-4 time multiple that we're then able to reinvest back into the sport. Now, that's going to look a little different this year, because once we add in another additional $1.3 million, we're going to be talking about a 6 or even 7 times multiple of investment. So in other words, that you're getting 6-7 times the dollars out the other end that's being invested in by membership, and we just wouldn't be able to do that without having the team that we have on the ground at Rowing Canada going out and securing those dollars. So unless there are any questions around that chart, I think what I'm probably going to do is go on to the second chart, which shows the investment that gets made.
Yeah, I'm going to comment though first, because I'm getting lots of text messages already.
Oh.
So, okay, so we just found out about Community Sport for All.
Oh, right, gosh.
Earlier this week. So what typically happens is we get notified. It's like a 1-pager confirming that we're going to get funding, and what a relief it was that we did get that this week. But we are still waiting for a bit of a longer document that's going to outline some of the expectations they'll fall within like a contribution agreement. So we don't have all details yet, which means we can't actually start passing more details on to you. But I do know that we are really keen to move on it quickly, because we know some of you are chomping really to get some programming up and running. And so as soon as we know more, which fingers crossed in the next day or two, we'll be able to act on it. Yes. So there's a question about the hosting grant. If you just go back one. So I've chosen to show we applied for and received $1 million of federal hosting money spread over 2 years from federal money in support of the Mega Worlds. But a small amount of that money goes towards some of our events administration in general. We can pull some, but the majority of that money is flow through to the local organizing committee for the Mega Worlds, if that helps answer your question, Bill. But I thought it was important to show the total amount. So what you can see here, and again, this chart will look familiar to some of you, and I'll try and focus, just partly in interests of time, on the pieces that I think we would typically see as directly kind of benefiting our membership, and really what we think of when we think about collecting the dues and fees. So, I mean, the first place I'd go to is the top left-hand corner, which is the membership services, and that covers all of the different forms of insurance and so on that we're able to invest in on your behalf and get a collective agreement for that, and basically get something that's a lot more cost effective than it would be if we were all trying to do that on our own. In addition to that, there continues to be an investment in our safe sport infrastructure. I don't think there'll be any surprises there. It's something that we've been very public about, and it's very much a requirement of all national sport organizations to continue to build out that framework. So as well as that, there's the things you'd expect to see in terms of investment in coach education, investment in umpire development and umpire training, and investment in the infrastructure and framework around regattas and events. And that includes our national events, but also the national conference, which I'm sure we're going to be announcing some things about shortly, and we're super excited about that coming to Quebec and Quebec City for that conference. And then
You'll also see in there some of what goes into the investment around governance and obviously national operations, and a lot of that is to do with the bricks and the mortar and the actual staff that we have that enable us to do things like apply for CSI funding and execute the programming and so on that we do. So, I mean, that's where the investment goes. That's where the money that we get in goes. And again, I hope, I'm happy to take questions about any more of the detail around that, but I hope there's a good appreciation of for the $500,000 that comes in from membership. What we're able to do is reflect that, and as I say, this year that will be over $3 million of investment that go back into clubs and members and so on and so on. And so, unless there are any questions, I think that's all from me, Jen.
Okay. Into the thick of it now, Derek.
Okay, there's a couple of you I had a chance to speak with just personally earlier in the last few days. I'm going to play the new card game for a little while longer as the new treasurer, so be kind and gentle. If possible, either Jen or Ren, whoever's driving the PowerPoint bus, I need you to blow it up. Oh, that's lots. Okay, just to see that. So, folks, what this does, if you've participated in these calls in the past, you, pardon me, this document may seem is hopefully somewhat familiar to you. So what we've got is 2000 through the fiscal year ending March 2000. All right, these are always year-end numbers, March 31st numbers of the year stated at the top of the chart. 2000 through 2023. These are the audited numbers. So if you were to compare these numbers to the audited statements, they will match. All right, that's really important. The final column, the 2024 to the left, with reading left to right, the first column, is our budget that the board approved in April of this year for the current year, based on what we knew at the time, blah, blah, blah. All right. So we're basically showing, where the trending has occurred these last few years. Clearly, particularly 21 and 22, and to a certain degree 23 would have been impacted significantly by COVID. So there's some weird things that might look weird in there. Pretty well, all of that, I'll guarantee you, although I wasn't back into the fray at the time, would have been COVID impacts on financials. It's that simple. So they are anomalies, and they will wash out down the road. Basically, this year, the board approved a deficit. Now, just one sec, of almost $135,000. Sorry, I'm stuttering because I'm a little there, but that's better. Thank you. I was getting covered by the translation there. Thank you. So this basically gives you an outline at a pretty high level of the total pot going in, and Terry explained the minor swing from a budget to the previous chart on the revenue line. So when we prepared the budget, or when the team prepared the budget back in the spring, early spring, we budgeted at 8 and not quite a flush or flat budget. On an $8 million budget, almost 8.5, to come out with a slight deficit is never what you're looking for, and we'll be working towards to reducing those even further as time goes on. But the board was comfortable approving a relatively it's material but not a huge deficit, and although it comes out in the wash as a reduction in our retained earnings this year, roughly about 100,000 of that is actually depreciation. And that's important to understand from a cash flow and a cash management basis. We're never going to prepare our statements on a cash basis, but it's important that there's a significant chunk of amortization that goes into an organization such as ours. Again, we will be working towards, and we'll talk about this in just a moment, as we look at fees and all other aspects in the weeks and months ahead, as we start to prepare for the 24-25 budget, being into either a flat budget or possibly even small surpluses, depending on a few decisions that have to be made in the months ahead. This gives you a good breakdown, similar to the chart before us, before this one, of where we're basically investing our money, the sources of revenue. And as you can see, we're highly leveraged on in different areas on grant money. And we need to work towards step by step in a meaningful, manageable way to change that ratio of how much of our revenue is grant versus other forms. Because if grants become shakier, some, as Terry and Jennifer just described, some of them we don't know until very late in the year. There's one grant, thankfully not a huge one, but an important one that we're not going to know about till February. So that just adds to the uncertainty and the complexity of managing the finances for the association. And all of this has been factored into trying to consider where we should land with a recommendation on next year's fee structure for the membership. This is very quick. This will be available, and I'll be happy to answer any questions on this in just a moment, either tonight or even when we do the plenary session in January. But this is just trying to give you a clear idea at a 10,000 foot level of how the association's been tracking financially. I'm going to stop there for just a second before I go to the next slide. There's nothing in particular that's out of whack. So there's nothing I wanted to drill down to, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Now, this next slide, the statement of financial position, or what will be known to many of you from who are as old as I am, as the balance sheet for the association as of March 31st of this year. So it's out of the audited statement. So the reason I wanted to include this evening is to basically show the value and what our retained earnings is, and what our how much money does Rowing Canada, quote unquote, have in the bank, where we're starting from with a flat budget. This basically, in very round numbers, folks, these are the key numbers here. I hope you can, you won't be able to see my cursor. So the fund balances is what I'm referring to down in the very lower part of the sheet. Thank you. That's what I'm referring to. Those are the key numbers for us over the longer term, as much as anything, because what that indicates is the financial sustainability of the organization. That's a number that we'll want to build over time. It's also, okay, put another way, what's your cushion if we have a bit of a disruptive year? So this is a very, very important number. So it basically says that we've got, I'm rounding, $1 million in cashable assets in the unrestricted and the internally restricted funds. And then the remainder is basically in capital equipment, which you're all familiar with. So I was thinking that if somebody wondered, well, what's our current financial position and what is the impact of fees and any loss or any surplus, it's all reflected in the balance sheet. So this basically says we've got a nest egg. If you take include the book value of the assets, meaning if we sold them today or on March 31st, that's what they're worth. We've got a value of about $2 million in there. All right. So that's important, in my opinion, to have in the back of your mind as we assess the going forward for budgeting and revenue sources, including what we're talking about tonight, which is our dues and fees. I'm going to stop there for a moment and kind of let you digest that for 10 seconds. And if there are any questions, please feel free to ask. Okay, if you think of something, please fire it into the chat at any time. Go ahead, folks, with the slide. Next slide.
Oh, we're over to you now, Rob. Oh, I think you're still on mute.
I'm just unmuting myself. Welcome, everybody. I'm Rob Patterson. I owe a great debt of gratitude to Richard Galway. I took over very late in the game in this role in the last few weeks, actually. And I have Richard's done a wonderful job in getting everything lined up. So I'm just like in a relay race, I got handed the baton as strongly in the lead as we hit the line. So Richard, thank you very much. For all of you who don't know much about the process, and I knew nothing about this until recently, all your members here of the committee are appointed by the provincial associations. So we do really reflect a broad spectrum of the national interest of the clubs. The other point I'd like to make is that because of the survey that Jen ran this year, the committee is in a much stronger position to feel confident about what we were doing. It would be very difficult for any one of us to speak to all the various clubs in our region, and the survey gave us a sound foundation in looking at the situation. The big issue is, again, what was the measure we were going to use to come up with a number? And in the end, Derek suggested, and we all agreed instantly, that as bad a number as it is, the official rate offered by the CPI for what inflation is at least something that we can all look at and go, well, that's the official number. And that's why the number of 4% came up. And whilst many of us understand that 4% applies only to a certain basket of costs, it's something that we can all relate to. Many of us understood that in some cases, particularly in insurance and everything, that the inflation rate is much higher. But in terms of the burden on the club world, and looking at Rowing Canada's own position, the committee agreed unanimously and very quickly that 4% was a rate that would be fair and that we could all live with. And that's generally the argument that went on behind the scenes. It wasn't really an argument, actually. It was a general agreement pretty well instantly. So we've decided on when we say an approximate 4%, we started with 4%, and then we did some rounding simply to make the numbers easier to administer. All of us in clubland are the ones that in the end have to administer these things in our own world, and it's a lot easier to understand a whole number than it is to apply a broken number. So here we are applying the 4%. The base participant fee is the critical fee for clubs. It's a small fee, but it adds up, and it is actually the fee that affects club life more than anything else. So we've gone from $26.25 to $27.50, and the seat fee from $3.85 to $4. And we're looking at applying a 4% fee to club membership dues and to the other dues as well. And the numbers are on the screen there. Again, are there any questions? Oh, by the way, and we have all not only put our hand up unofficially, but we've all put our hand up on the committee officially and passed a motion making this recommendation. I don't see any questions.
Yeah, I don't either, Rob. I think you can keep going.
I think that Terry made a very good point here that we need to do a lot more work on the whole way that these fees work, because if you look back at Rowing Canada's own numbers over the last few years. As Derek said, it's very dependent on government funding, which has remained the same for many years. During a low inflation period, this was somewhat livable. But with the inflation that we've been living with over the last year or so, and there really is no sign of this going away, it really means effectively that Rowing Canada is being squeezed very badly. On the other hand, in club world, in clubland, we're feeling the same thing as well. So one of the things that Derek has been talking about to the members of the committee is, and he's alluded to it at the moment, I think it's important for all of us to start to realize that relying on government money as the sole or the majority source of our funding is something that we have to really question. And I think I'd like to end here is that we need to, over the next year or so, look at how our clubs work, as well as Rowing Canada and the provincial associations, and start to carve out a more business-like model. I'll stick with that, Jen.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Okay, I see some questions popping up here in the chat. Okay, I have concerns with the increase in seat fees, but I have no question. Okay, it is going to be noticed at the regattas. Okay, thanks, Bill. And I think that it is worthwhile to point out that we're going from, or the suggestion here, recommendation is going from $3.85 to $4, which is 15 cents. But there's a psychology around it when you go from, start a number that starts with a 3 versus a number that starts with a 4. So definitely appreciate your comment there. I'm gonna go to
Bill,
the next.
did you say? Did you want to? It says +1. It was just you were.
I've got a couple +1. Yeah, Bill, I don't know what you mean.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Next question. Absolutely, it affects club life when considered with the provincial fees. Has RCA projected the tipping point when participation in rowing will be reduced as a result? No, and we haven't done any work on that kind of projection. But I will say, I think that just based on sort of like anecdotal feedback that we're getting really post-pandemic, and starting to understand that people in general are expecting their sort of sport experience to shift alongside, their own sort of shifts in how they approach organized sport. People are looking for more casual sort of experiences or flexibility with how they interact with a club. People are looking for more things like punch cards instead of the standard sort of you row from April to the end of October sort of thing, Monday, Wednesday, Friday morning. And so I just share that because I think we are entering a time where we are going to have to do a bit of work to understand really what do the participants really, what do they want, and what are they willing to pay for with organized sport based on what they get. So I hope that it's on our mind, but we haven't done an actual sort of analysis or survey of that yet, but I anticipate it's coming. I think that response that I just provided to sort of addresses what Orca is asking here also. So they're saying any consideration to having a day or an event fee for people who want to compete in 1 or 2 events in a year, like some of the coastal events, but are not a member of a club because they have their own boat and row on a body of water separate from club and thus don't benefit from joining a club. So I think that this is the sort of stuff that we're going to need to explore. The way that people are expecting or are going to want to interact with organized sport, I think, is evolving. And we've already starting to see it happen, and not just in rowing. We know that it's happening in other sports too. So it's definitely something we're going to have to unpack more and try some things and see what's going to work. I'm going to keep going here. Next one. Okay. Is it an accurate statement that a lot of government funding does come from lotteries?
No.
I don't think it is.
No, I think
No.
there's certain provincial funding comes out of lottery funding, but the vast majority of funding for federal national sport organizations comes directly out of a treasury purse through ministry distribution. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to say provincially that the uncertainties about amounts and timing are also relevant, certainly in Quebec world. The Aviron Quebec faces the same stresses, Terry, that Rowing Canada does, but at the provincial level.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Yeah.
Okay, next question I'm seeing. Everything is going up in cost, but our income's going up at the same rate to match all these increased costs. Incomes, like their revenue sources, Orca?
It's where it depends whether you mean like are our incomes going up? The answer is not really. Or do you mean like individual spending power? You know, are they people getting paid more?
I say personal income, right?
Yeah. I have a feeling that right now most of us are feeling that our personal income is not keeping up with expenditures, and there's probably going to be a lag around that for a little while the economy resets around the inflation rates that we're seeing. So yeah, I think we recognize that that's a challenge, and it's why I think, you know, we worked hard with the dues and fees committee to try and find an amount that felt appropriate, but without sharing all of the increases that we're certainly noticing, and I'm sure you guys, most of you are noticing, just recognizing that we didn't want to reflect all of that onto clubs and members and participants. You know, I'm sure we could have made a case for more than a 4% increase, but I don't think we felt good about that. You know, for that reason. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and Derek's mentioning that just having an understanding of what does occur sort of province to province, that it is in fact variable, sort of the specific sources of funding that they can access. Thanks, Derek. Okay, Dave. In the 5-year summary of operations, regatta income is showing an estimated drop of more than 100%, yet under expenses, it is predicted that regattas and events is showing a budgeted increase of 45. Can you reconcile that? Maybe I'll head back to that slide. Okay. I'll just repeat that. Let me get oriented. In the 5-year summary of operations, regatta income is showing an estimated drop of more than 100%. Yet under expenses, it is predicted that regattas and events is showing a budgeted increase of 45%. Can you reconcile that? Who wants to take that one?
Look, I don't know. It's a really good question. I mean, there is obviously an answer. I'd have to pull up another level of detail than what I've got in front of me. I'm happy to speak to that the next time we look at these numbers. So when we look at it in January, or I can send something out ahead of that, Derek. I'd be guessing. I've got some ideas, but I'd be guessing if I'm honest.
We can, and if there's any other questions, either this evening or even after this evening, similar to Dave's, where we need to dig in a little more into the statements. Happy to do that. I can't do that off the top of my head because I haven't delved into the numbers personally myself that deep yet. But we can certainly, that'll be an example. Dave, we can have some answers for that for the plenary in January. I don't want to get into sending a bunch of other stuff out until I've had a chance to go through everything and I have a list of things, but we can definitely make note to have an answer to that question and any other questions we get ahead of time for that plenary session. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Dave. Maybe I'm going to speak to the last slide here. It's related to the just next steps. That doesn't mean that the questions need to stop coming in, but I'll just do this now in case anyone's just formulating a question. So next steps include, we're going to meet in January in Quebec City around the national conference. So the actual semi-annual meeting is scheduled for the Sunday, the 28th. There will be proxy voting available. So for those of you who can't attend in person, please, someone from your province or another club, someone else you know might be there, so you can provide them the rights for proxy to lodge your vote. And every Saturday before the semi-annual meeting, we spend time with those who are on site to go through this information again and answer more questions. And so hopefully we'll see some of you there, but there's lots of time in between then and the end of January to ask questions. And so I hope we provided lots of options for who you can connect with. And Ren, I don't know, maybe if you could plunk it in the chat if we haven't already, that might be helpful. But the content should actually be in the package, I believe, that you would have received, or we can follow up and make sure you have the contact information that you need. Okay.
So I've just been digging around. So Derek, I'm fairly sure that the differential in that regatta expenditure is related to the hosting grant that flows through to Henley, and it would show in income as a Sport Canada income, not as a regatta and events income, if that helps explain. I'm pretty sure that's what it is, looking at this.
Okay. Next question, Susan. Maybe it makes sense to have a short boilerplate statement that the regatta fee supports umpire training, safety, etc., that benefits all participants for the public, parents, new competitors who may not be familiar with RC and PRA programs, how far that fee goes. Event organizers could use this under additional information on Regatta Central to reassure competitors. Yeah, I think that's definitely something we could pull together, Susan.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Suggestion. Okay, Marion. I'm going to keep going. Club and participant fees are both passed on to the participants. In our small club, the NSO and PRA fee adds up to over $100 per member. This is about 90% more than larger clubs, in essence, over 300 members. Has RCA thought about the detrimental impact club fees have on small clubs? This is a topic of conversation that we've had often. I don't know, Terry or Derek, did you want to speak to this?
Well, I mean, again, you'll help me if I'm not fully understanding the question, but it's certainly the case that when you look at the burden that falls on different size clubs, I think it can be helpful to just look at the whole picture, which is so a club like, I don't know, the size of like Vic City or Ottawa or something like that. So the clubs that have got larger membership, when you look at the overall contribution that they make into the dues and fees, you're right, there's the club fee, but also they make, I mean, when you look at the participant-based fees, that adds up to tens of thousands of dollars as well. And so from a large club perspective, when they look at the contribution they're making, and when we look at it, we kind of go, well, a larger club is making a much more significant contribution to the overall impact on dues and fees. And you're right, for a smaller club, the actual dollar amount distributed between the members of that club fee is definitely a higher proportion for sure. But again, it's trying to balance out, you know, what is true for any organization that's a member of Rowing Canada and what benefit they get, as opposed to the benefit that individual members get. And so we're constantly trying to sort of balance those things out. Yeah, I mean, Jen, I don't know whether you want to say any more to that. And this is a conversation that we talk about a lot, because we're trying to get the dial in the right place, I think, and we talk to dues and fees about that as well.
Yeah, that like the concept of like that sliding scale. We also talk about sort of, is there something like a completely different approach or something special we can do for the small clubs, but we definitely haven't included it in any sort of like consultation that we've done recently. So I think if we were to go there, that is a sort of, we'd have to add it and learn a bit more from the clubs.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, next one. Okay, budgeted expenses for national operations shows a decrease to approximately $395K. While previous years showed year-over-year increase in the line item, is there a concern over effectiveness of operational support with a smaller budget, especially in light of rising costs due to inflation?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Jen, you live it, so so yeah, it's tough. I mean, Robert spoke about the impact of that creeping cost base that you can absorb to a certain extent. And then when you live through real inflation, what the impact of that is. Those numbers, I think we're confident those numbers will look a little different once we factor in some of the other funding that we're expecting to benefit from over the next few months. But yeah, it's a real concern for sure. Yeah.
Okay, Hanlon's asking, oh, you're a bit late. That's okay. Nice to see you here. But will materials be sent out after the meeting? Okay, we are a large club. The fees are onerous for us. We have tiny margins. Yes. So a lot of the information that we had on the slides was already included in the package that you would have received later yesterday. But if you, for some reason, didn't get that, this information is going to be posted on the website. The webinar recording will also go on the website, and then all of this will be included in the package that goes forward with the voting package for the semi-annual meeting. Okay, and what are the strategies of RCA to diversify your funding model away from grant reliance?
You don't want to answer that one, Jen?
Well, no, I feel like Derek should answer that one. Or no, we sort of touched on that, didn't we?
We did. So yeah, I'll answer it. It's not a long one. It's really simple right now. I'm sorry, I just lost the person's name. Anne. Right now, there isn't a big, long, drawn out scheme or thought out plan. What was briefly mentioned in the presentation, Robert mentioned, and what I've just barely started to float through with the senior leadership team and the board is what we need to do, and it's going to be quite timely, as you'll hear shortly. Rowing Canada is also about to embark on a strategic planning process for the next quad that's coming up before you know it. We need Rowing Canada, as well as I believe the provinces and the clubs, but speaking specifically for Rowing Canada, we need to develop and work through a long-term financial strategy. And that will include a number of considerations, both on the revenue management, diversification side, and expense management, and so on and so forth. I hope this isn't taken the wrong way, but I'm going to say it because you're going to hear me say it over and over again in the months ahead. And I said it a few times just within the dues and fees committee process. The sport as a whole and every level of it, so the national body, the provincial bodies, and the clubs, all of us need to really take a much more business-like approach to how we manage our organizations. And I think some organizations, some clubs probably do it very, very well. Some clubs may not yet. And we gotta assess all of those things and find some longer term strategies. It won't be a 1-year band-aid. It needs to be longer term of what the opportunities can be. It's going to be it's a big project. I make it sound a lot simpler than it's actually going to be, and I'm very aware of that. And we will that will be the next step in the months ahead. And that might sound like, well, we're dragging it out. Well, we're not dragging it out. It needs to consider a lot of things, including consultation with various aspects of the membership. So it is on our radar, but don't expect a big announcement in January, let's say. We have to work it through. We got to work it through together.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe just to add a little bit to that. So there is a reality, and I do believe that we have talked about core funding and the fact that it hasn't really shifted in certainly in my time and even before that. It's very, very front of mind for all national sport organizations, the way in which the funding model currently operates and where it serves sport and where it doesn't serve sport. So you won't be surprised to hear that the NSOs act as what's called a caucus, which basically means as a collective, and it's the number one topic of conversation, alongside making sure that some of the work around safe sport goes the way it needs to go. But it is really just addressing this issue about funding, and there are a few options on the table. Some of them involve restructuring of the sports system in order to make more efficient use of the funding. I think there are versions of that within our communities that we need to think about, just in terms of there is funding available at club level, there is funding available at provincial level, as well as the funding that we are able to garner at a national level. And I think we're going to be finding ourselves looking to be more efficient and effective and more aligned in the way that we use the resources that we have, because as it stands right now, there isn't in the near term a prospect of increased levels of funding. It's part of where we are. I mean, I spend a lot of time looking at where could we be more efficient, but also where could we gather more revenue. We do extraordinarily well of seeking out different revenue sources. I mean, it might all get called grant funding, but it comes from different pots, and so that creates some diversification, which helps limit some of the risks. But yeah, I mean, there were days gone by when you used to be able to benefit from things like, sponsorship, which almost isn't really a word anymore in sport in the way that it would have been in the past. But there are partnerships and in-kind relationships that we do benefit from, and those are the things that go together to help us get to where we need to get to. But I mean, it's hard to step away from the reality that at the moment, sport in Canada is funded in a certain way, and that the way in which it's been funded hasn't really changed in the last 20 years. Yeah.
Okay, we have a few more here. Okay, it feels like, or Dave, Derry, if you're okay, I'm not gonna read out your question because you just, I think, indicated that Terry and I think Derek has answered your questions. Okay, it feels like some of the ideas about membership models have been raised before multiple times. RCA needs to be creative if we are all struggling with making ends meet. When will the ideas raised here and other ideas be seriously looked at? There are many people who row on their own and they would love to have an organization to connect with. RCA does not have anything for this group of people, recreational, but likely interested in participating in some coastal events. Okay, so yeah, there's a few things here. I'm just gonna repeat some of what we said earlier, because I think it is relevant. So when we surveyed the membership over the summer, some of our key takeaways were that the membership model in its current form is considered suitable for the current membership, specific to the participant categories and like the seat fee structure. So that structure. That being said, I think the people who were involved in assessing it, it almost felt like it was suitable for like the existing membership, not necessarily like what could the membership become if you were thinking like bigger and bolder and like 10 years down the road. And so there's an appreciation for that. I also mentioned earlier that we do have some information. We need to unpack a bit more, like what is it going to take to, with those equity deserving groups, a different sort of avenue or different sort of approach. It feels a bit uncomfortable and just bizarre, really, to require some of them to register and become a member of like a provincial body in rowing Canada. Just as an example, think like a Boys and Girls Club programming. It just feels bizarre. And so there's something there that we're going to do some work on. And I think also when we start the conversations around coastal, there's a lot of talk right now, like the whole approach to coastal could be so outside of what we're comfortable with. And that could be really fun. And so I think we're in it right now. So whoever is representing Orca right now asking these questions, I really think that this is happening now. It's like in the next 18 months, you're going to start experiencing changes or us testing different models to see what works. And then again, at the risk of repeating myself, like I just think the membership as a whole, society as a whole, and how they choose to interact with organized sport is shifting. And all of us, those who run the clubs and the provinces and the national governing body, like, we really need to lean in and listen and be comfortable doing things differently. I think eventually there will be some structures that the sort of standard organized sport and programming is going to become absent, and we are going to have more really different types of programming, is like what we're sensing based on what we're kind of hearing internal with rowing, and also what I'm hearing from other national sport federations. So I hope that sort of addresses that question, or at least it's sharing sort of like similar sentiments or thinking that we have with what you brought forward there, Orca. So I'm just going to keep going. If you look at other rowing organizations across the world, are there any that have broken their dependence on government funding?
Sure, there are a few different models out there. Those federations that are in similar kind of socioeconomic political environments to us have very similar kind of models around funding, and similar proportions. I mean, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain have, I would say, have an even higher reliance on government funding perhaps than we do, and typically that means they actually just have more funding. Other parts of the world, so Germany, the US, they rely less on government funding for sure, but in Germany there's a significant the way a lot of athletes are members of the military and police and things like that, and that's how they're able to fund their rowing. In the US it's very aggressively self-funded, so athletes and participants are paying significantly higher amounts of money, certainly to be part of things like national team programming, but I imagine that's also true in other kinds of activity across the organization as well. So what there aren't are there are a few examples. I mean, we have one in Canada, which is Canadian Henley and Head of the Charles and British Henley, and so there are events that do generate real significant revenue. And I think there's certainly something that we need to look at in terms of other ways that we can leverage events to raise additional revenue, and look at events like Head of the Charles and look at British Henley and those kinds of events, and try and understand whether there are things that we can learn from those kinds of events. So these definitely are things that we're looking at. The last thing I would say, Jen spoke to it, I mean, everything that we're hearing, and to be honest, a lot of what we're seeing is likely means that the model around coastal rowing may look a little different from the model that we currently have. I mean, partly reflecting some of the sentiment of the comments that I'm reading in the chat about some of the differences between coastal rowing and more traditional rowing, but also as a sport, what we're hearing and seeing is that the model is going to be a different kind of a model. Yeah.
Okay. Some of these are statements, but I think it's valuable just to read them out, because sometimes the text is tiny and I can't remember if it gets picked up by the recording if we just leave it in the chat. So Zahuir says, agree with the previous comments, brainstorming on creative financial planning and management. I would suggest holding roundtables, focus solely on theme of funding that provides a forum through which clubs and associations can learn from each other and deliberate on ideas and solutions, and even invite organizations outside of Canada as subject matter experts, speakers, advisors, panelists. Okay, thanks, Zahur. Okay, Bill, I can appreciate the statement of the reviewing event participant inclusion, specifically in coastal events. The current fee model does impact participation. Where we are seeing the challenge to grow coastal events is these folks who do own their own boats and compete all around the US, or coastal clubs who are not members of RCA or US rowing. The $75 to join a Canadian club is not attractive to participate in 1 or 2 races per year. Is this going to be an item for discussion at the AGM, or will there be consideration for a model like other sports? I don't know if there'll ever be a discussion at the AGM. So that's the annual meeting is what's held in September of year. I think you're probably referencing like around the conference. Maybe we could still fit something in right now. The conference schedule is pretty set right now, and I think we could sneak something in or make sure we find a way to have some of that conversation, Bill. Yeah. Okay, another comment here. Coastal 1000%, but indoor rowing is another huge opportunity. We need to be really creative how to significantly grow this sport to be more self-sufficient. And as Derek said, run our clubs and orgs as businesses. I'm super excited on how we can tap new markets that have not been. There is so much opportunity, just need to be strategic and committed to making positive change. The future's so bright and can't wait to roll up our sleeves and get to work. It's such a nice positive outlook. Perfect. I'm sure you talked to curling. They seem to have a good job at diversifying funding. Example, Pinty, Scotties, etc. We do speak to curling. Yes. Thanks, Henlin. And yes, curling is doing an amazing job at all levels, local, provincial, and national. They're definitely a great example. It's always
they generate a lot of fun through those events that you just listed. Yeah.
I just want to see, does anyone want to speak? Or I know it's easier for some people to speak than it is chat. I just wanted to remind everyone it's okay if you want to take yourself off of mute, by all means, because we're getting close to wrapping up. Oh yes, tennis generates a lot of money.
Yeah, tennis has the Rogers Cup, which skating is another sport. They have a cycle of how often they host international events and world championships, and they generate a lot of money. And actually, I mean, it just happened to be also a thing that they really got clobbered during COVID because they couldn't host those events. I mean, it was one of the mixed blessings of the fact that we weren't relying on that for revenue. That meant that we got through that a little easier, but that doesn't change, I think, the aspiration that we're hearing about. And I think we also share to look at events as a way of generating revenue. Yeah.
I think we have to find something that's a good fit for us, right? Rowing, we're unique. We're not the size of the tennis or even like curling either, right? There's got to be something out there that's going to be really a good fit for the size and of our sport in Canada, and also enables us to aspire to be something bigger. I'm not seeing any other questions. This has been a really interesting, helpful dialogue. I'm glad that
Bill, did you come off mute? Were you going to say something? Yeah.
Oh.
I did. I was just going to say thank you for listening and hearing some of the challenges with Coastal, and I can appreciate that it's kind of on the mind that you'll be looking into helping support us grow the sport, because people are very passionate when it comes to Coastal for those who participate. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe I'll just say this, I'm keeping an eye on the time. Like we're playing around with the language to do with Coastal, so conscious that not many of our provinces are actually on a coast, and so playing around with words like open water or recognizing beach as a specific discipline of it. And so it's just those are the kinds of conversations that are going on right now to really understand how to create a language and a model that's really going to resonate with all Canadians. Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm conscious that it's late for some. So but I don't want to cut this too short. Okay, great. We have more coming in here. It isn't just Coastal that would need the short-term membership. It can also be used to grow your club. Yeah, totally, Nancy. It's like, we really need to learn more about just short-term programming. Okay, maybe we'll do, and I'll just mention Andrew's question first, and then we'll do Orca, who's raised her hand. So how is RCA leveraging the 2024 Mega Worlds to generate revenue like other NSOs?
Yeah, so I mean, the difference between obviously a rowing event and something like a tennis or a skating event where you've got an arena-based sport and that you can generate significant revenue from ticket sales and so on. It's not that we can't generate some revenue from that, but it's just a little bit different. It's a slightly different proposition. I'm not aware of any World Rowing Championship event apart from Masters events that actually generate revenue. In most cases, they end up being subsidized, and the benefit really comes in being able to celebrate and recognize Canadian rowers in Canada, and that's what we're excited about being able to do with the Mega Worlds, and looking for creative ways of sending maybe some slightly bigger teams and some more athletes, because we're competing on home water. But yeah, good question, Andrew.
Okay, Janice from Orca, over to you.
Thank you for the conversation and all the ideas from people. My question is really around, sorry, I'm just trying to get my video going, but okay. My question is around costs of events. So I'll use as an example the Race Around the Rock, because to enter that event, it's a 88-kilometer event around Salt Spring Island. For those of you who don't know, entry fee is $120 per person, whether you rode in a boat with one person or you had 10 people on a team. It could be done as people in a double or a quad rowing the entire distance, or it could be done as a relay. So some teams had 13 people. Everybody still paid $120. Part of that was to cover the costs of pre-event meal, but a significant cost is around safety boats and umpires. And I'm just wondering what could be done in that regard, because that's a huge amount for someone to pay for well, I guess it's longer than rowing a 2,000-meter race, but it's still quite a lot of money. And along with that, you have to pay for, if you don't have a boat, there's boat rental, you have to pay to get to the island, you have to stay overnight, at least one night. So there's accommodation as well. So overall, it becomes quite an expensive endeavor, and anyone who's done it has had a great time. But I do know that the organizers struggle with the costs, and there's also the environmental impact of motorboats following people around. And I guess I'm just wondering, I know there's a safety and events committee. Is that a committee that would look at kind of the logistics of some of these events?
Yeah.
If we're trying to increase membership, increase participation, we need to make it so people can afford it, and that it doesn't adversely impact, say, the environment.
Yeah, Janice, Jen, do you want to, I've got a comment, but yeah.
Okay, yes, and what's happening right now is, so as everyone I think here knows, we have a very, I'll say, like, rigid structure approach to how rowing is organized and delivered in Canada, right? That it's really challenging to take an emerging discipline, something that's new to us, and get it into that sort of rigid structure. And what we're already learning is that it's probably not fit for purpose. It's not going to work. So we are already starting to do work kind of in all areas, right? Whether it's how events are delivered, how they're overseen by groups like individuals like umpires, how we coach coastal and beach, how we register people for it. It's a major undertaking to get this right. And I think internally we've committed to just testing out things. And because it is emerging, it's probably going to change 5 years from now. So it doesn't make much sense to make a ton of change early on and firm it up. So I think we're entering a period of just testing out a lot of options and see what fits for us. And that's not our own sort of internal thinking exclusively. We've heard from other sports that have had to take on, or where there's been new disciplines that they've had to add, and they've cautioned us to not try to lean in too early and start creating rules and regulations, for instance, to just learn, test some things out and be flexible. And so I think that you're going to see a lot of that show up with our approach to coastal.
Yeah. So I'd add to that, I think, and say, so Janice, first of all, thank you for organizing that event. My wife's done it twice and she absolutely loves it. And I think we have to get, as Jen says, sort of under the hood of the specifics. Our sport really hasn't changed a whole lot. I know sometimes it feels like it's changing all the time, but in the broader aggregate, our sport hasn't really experienced the kind of change that we're going through right now in terms of the advent of a new discipline like open water rowing. And the different formats around that. It's not that there hasn't been kinds of open water, but not at the scale and the level and the way in which we're seeing within our sport. So that exploration to understand what choices we need to make is part of that, is definitely going to involve us leaning in, as we have done, I think, with some of those beach events, but some of the events, the unique events like Round the Rock, and really trying to understand what actually needs to be true, because you're asking the right questions. You know, do we need a safety boat following every boat? Do we need the same kind of orientation and number of umpires and officials that we have in a race? I mean, as Jen said, almost certainly not. But the work has to be done to understand how we can reshape the model so it does make more sense. I think it's very much on the radar to be doing that. So, I mean, thank you, Janice. Yeah, it's a good question.
Okay, so I'm starting to see we're losing people. Okay, because we're at the end of our webinar. I see one more question here, and then I think we'll start to wrap up. Was RCA involved in determining the admission ticket costs for the 2024 Mega Worlds?
Well, so there's a three-way partnership that organizes the World Championships. So World Rowing are part of that, we're part of that, and the local organizing committee. And the local organizing committee are the ones that actually build the budget. And there's requirements within that World Rowing have, and then there are some things that we've input into that. So I don't know exactly how to proportion that out, but I would say that the ticket pricing is largely based on the budgeting that the local organizing committee does, and then we have an input into that, and World Rowing have an input into that, if that's helpful. Yeah.
Okay.
Hanlon's got a hand up. Yeah.
I'm sorry, my hair is not purple, nor is it gray, but my camera doesn't work very well. That's why I had my camera off. I just wanted to mention that, I mean, probably a good example, like I have gone to rowing camps in the US. We have a group going to the Pan Am Masters event. I think we did some research, and almost everyone at our club has gone to either Craftsbury or another US rowing camp. We had a US rowing camp come to St. Catharines this summer and run something, and people pay money for this. And it's sort of a shame that and it may not be Rowing Canada, it may be the provincial organizations, but it seems to me there's an opportunity to run events, camps for masters, and masters do have money and probably don't want to jump on a plane to go to Florida Rowing Center. So I'd love to see more of that, and it might be a revenue source.
Yeah, that's definitely something that right now our priority is leaning into trying to like elevate like the masters, the championships, that event. We haven't done any work on that camp concept. I'm glad that you mentioned it, and I agree too that there are certain things that maybe would be more suitable for provincial entities to lead into, and that's something that we can share with them. But we totally understand where you're coming from on that. We agree. We've heard that before. Yeah. Okay, everyone, it's been wonderful as usual, spending 90 minutes talking about dues and fees and other interesting topics. Thank you for your time. I hope you were at least satisfied with the information that we were able to provide. But if we didn't get to it today, if something comes to mind for you, contact one of us and we'll get you the
Oh, I'm typing. I'm sure we did thank the Dues and Fees Committee, and I'm sure we'll have other opportunities to do that. But I do just want to acknowledge, I mean, Robert mentioned Richard's contribution, but there are other members of the committee on here that were listed at the beginning. I'm not going to list them again, but I do just want to say a huge thank you. It's a lot of work that they do, a lot of information, some of which we shared, a lot of which we haven't shared with you this evening, that they process in coming up with the support of the recommendations that get made. And yeah, I mean, I don't know what others think about the process. I really like the process. I like the fact that we have a direct conversation with membership about how we set the dues and fees. Not all sports do that, but we do, and it's something that I think is extraordinarily helpful and beneficial. So thank you, and thanks for joining us this evening.